I'm Max Pringle with these headlines. Chinese leader Xi Jinping is on the second day of his trip to Moscow to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin for discussions on the Ukraine war and other issues. The two leaders discussed a Chinese proposal for a ceasefire in Ukraine during the first day of talks in Moscow Monday. Xi's visit is a boost to Moscow as it struggles to make ground in its year-long war on Ukraine, but it was criticized by Washington as providing diplomatic cover for Putin and for the war crimes his forces are accused of committing there. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Monday that a peace agreement must begin with a Russian withdrawal from Ukraine.
The fundamental element of any plan for ending the war in Ukraine and producing a just and durable peace must be upholding the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine in accordance with the United Nations Charter. Any plan that does not prioritize this critical principle is a stalling tactic at best, or is merely seeking to facilitate an unjust outcome.
Xi has reportedly invited Vladimir Putin to Beijing for further talks. Meanwhile, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida made a surprise visit today to the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. The visit coincides with China's Xi Jinping Moscow visit and steals some of the global spotlight from that visit meant to bolster Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. Kishida said his visit is meant to show solidarity and unwavering support for Ukraine. Kishida told Ukrainian officials that he plans to, quote, provide maximum support in order to restore peace in Ukraine. Japanese media said Kishida rode a train from Poland to Ukraine and visited a church in Bucha, a town outside Kyiv that became a symbol of Russian atrocities against civilians, and laid flowers at a church there and paid his respects to the victims. His trip comes just hours after he met with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New Delhi, and a week after a breakthrough summit with South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol. Ukrainian officials said the country's military has targeted and destroyed Russian missiles being transported by train in the Crimean Peninsula. Feature Story News' Laura Macon-Isherwood has more.
A spokesperson for Ukraine's military said it was a signal to Moscow that it should leave the area, which is currently occupied by Russia. The Kremlin has denied the strike was successful, though. Officials on the ground saying while the attack left one civilian wounded, there was no serious damage caused. From Feature Story News in London, I'm Laura Macon-Isherwood.
French President Emmanuel Macron's government has narrowly survived a no-confidence vote, which was triggered when it forced through controversial pension reforms. It sparked new anti-government protests in Paris, where 101 people were arrested after standoffs with police. The vote, tabled by centrist MPs, had 278 votes in favor, falling short of the 287 votes needed. Had it been successful, Macron would have had to name a new government or call new elections. A second no-confidence motion, tabled by Marine Le Pen's far-right National Rally Party, also did not pass. Now, both votes have failed. The controversial bill to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64 will become law. Monday's failed votes saw fresh protests in Paris with a tense standoff between protesters and anti-riot police. President Biden signed a bipartisan COVID-19 transparency bill Monday. It directs the federal government to declassify as much intelligence as possible about the origins of COVID-19 more than 3 years after the start of the pandemic. The legislation sailed through both houses and directs the Office of the Director of National Intelligence to declassify intelligence related to China's Wuhan Institute of Virology. It cites potential links between the research that was done there and the outbreak of COVID-19, which the World Health Organization declared a pandemic on March 11, 2020. The law allows for redactions to protect sensitive sources and methods. U.S. intelligence agencies are divided over whether a lab leak or a spillover from animals is the likely source of the deadly virus. Experts say the true origin of the coronavirus pandemic, which has killed more than 1.1 million Americans and millions more around the globe, may not be known for many years, if ever. The Senate today will begin debating repealing congressional authorization that justified the Iraq War. The bipartisan effort, led by Virginia Democratic Senator Tim Kaine and Indiana Republican Todd Young, repeals the 2002 authorization of the use of military force under President George W. Bush that authorized the 2003 invasion. as well as the 1991 AUMF that authorized the first Gulf War under President George H.W. Bush. The vote is largely symbolic. Combat operations in the war ended over a decade ago, but Senate supporters say it's important for Congress to reassert its constitutional power to declare and end wars. That's it for news headlines. You're listening to Sojourner Truth on Pacifica Radio. I'm Max Pringle.